Brian, appreciate you for taking the time. Let's start with kind of the basics of it. This bill that's been proposed by lawmakers, diving into the scheduling of athletic events for state schools. Like, what all does it entail, and what does it mean?
Yeah, this was kind of expected. I mean, Jason Saint's been talking about this over the break here as a way of kind of keeping that money in the state, particularly when you had schools from California. He was particularly aggrieved about that. This would require UNC and NC State to not only play each other at least once a year in football, men's basketball, women's basketball, which isn't a problem now that they're in the same league, but if they were not in the same league, could be an issue. But it would also require both those schools, both UNC and NC State, to play at least one home or away game against Appalachian State, East Carolina, as well as UNC Charlotte in football, men's and women's basketball as well. And then it requires over a 6-year period for them to play home and away games against each of those schools. So it really does get into the minutia of scheduling. I don't know how realistic passage is, but I think this is a messaging bill from lawmakers that say, hey, you guys need to play each other more often.
To me, there's kind of two parts to this. One is the one you started with, which is NC State and UNC being required to play each other every year. That's an unnecessary bill if they're in the ACC together. So is this in preparation for maybe expecting one of them or both of them to go in different directions?
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken with lawmakers a lot about, conference realignment and what they expect to happen or what they think should happen. And almost everyone, unanimously, they think NC State and UNC should remain in the same conference. Again, we don't know if that's going to be possible or we don't know how likely that is. We don't know if either of these teams are even going to leave the ACC at some point. But I do think they've made it clear they want those schools, if they're not in the same conference, to be playing each other every single year. They are, the legislature, people will say, why is the legislature getting involved? They've invested billions of dollars, quite frankly, in both of those universities. They've invested billions in the whole university system. But those two schools in particular get a lot of money, a lot of funding, a lot of support from the state, and they want to make sure both of their athletic departments are doing well.
Brian Murphy, WRAL Sports Investigative Reporter, joining us on the Heister Automotive Group hotline. Is this putting the wants and kind of benefit and raising of the smaller programs as a priority, maybe ahead of NC State and UNC, who might use that non-conference schedule in other ways to benefit their program?
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember, and this is one of the big things about the legislature, right? Every county gets representation. So there are plenty of people who want to see Appalachian State or Charlotte or East Carolina taken care of. And they have just as much sway in many cases as the people representing Chapel Hill and NC and Raleigh do. Mm-hmm. In a lot of cases, the people representing those parts of the state are Republicans, and the people representing Chapel Hill and Raleigh are Democrats, and they have less say. So Jason Saint, who's one of the sponsors on this bill, is a Charlotte guy. There's a couple App State guys on this bill. So yeah, they're definitely looking out for number one. I think they say, why are you going to play? I'm trying to think of a team, South Alabama. Mm-hmm. Why are you going to play Troy when you could just play Charlotte or App State? I mean, the part I don't
because they say App State might be too good.
Well, right. They think fans want to see it, and it's true. Those games generate much more fan interest than a game against Toledo or Miami of Ohio or Troy. But those are also no-win games for NC State and UNC. If UNC loses to East Carolina, which they have, they get pilloried for it. But if they beat East Carolina, okay, well, you're supposed to beat East Carolina. Like, it's kind of a no-win situation. They got to hear about it for 365 days. If they lose to Miami of Ohio or they lose to Tulane, you don't have to hear about it all the time.
And it could also preclude them maybe from playing another Power 5 opponent in an era where resumes and big wins matter so much for selection committees and playoff appearances.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little less sympathetic to that because there's obviously 3 or 4 non-conference games. I mean, NC State and Carolina are not like, some of the other teams in the ACC that they have to play an SEC rival, on the last game of the season. It really limits, the number of non-conference opportunities they have. NC State and UNC have 4 games to play with all year, 4 non-conference games to play with every year. They can play a Power 5. You can play 2 Power 5s, quite frankly, maybe an FCS school, and then still have room on their schedule for one of these G5s. Of course, and you mentioned it, App State, ECU, and Charlotte, not as much, but App State and ECU can beat them. Those are games that you might lose, and that really, that's not how you want to build your schedule with a potential loss to a G5 team.
This is half joking, but maybe not. Right? There's always going to be a little pushback when lawmakers kind of stick their nose in sports, and it's, oh, don't you have something better? Should we be looking at like fandoms before we cast votes? Because like, hey, I need to make sure my lawmakers are defending my schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the regionality of where people come from. Is supposed to take care of that. I mean, Chapel Hill, Raleigh, they have people defending their interests. But I mean, this comes up a lot, right? We've talked about the Board of Governors and who's being appointed to the Board of Governors, and are there more NC State people than UNC people, and what are they going to do if realignment does come around and UNC wants to leave? Are they going to be more loyal to NC State? So I mean, certainly in a state like this where there's a lot of different colleges, people have gone to many different schools, they have different allegiances and alliances. I mean, that becomes a factor. And to say it's not a factor, I think would be naive.
You got to grab that? Is that
I don't. I'm
breaking
okay.
news? It's like when Adam Schefter is on NFL Live, and all of a sudden he's getting news about a trade. Last one before we let you go, and this one I actually skipped over my notes, but I want to see if you've done the background on it. Do other states have rules like this, or is North Carolina kind of breaking ground on this? I think of it like the cast of Friends. Like, they negotiate everything as a unit to make sure everybody is getting the same. Like, do other states operate this way with their state schools and their athletic programs?
I haven't dug into it, but I know that there's been some, especially like with some of these rivalries breaking apart because of conference realignment. There's been talk that like Washington and Washington State have to play every year, or Oregon and Oregon State. Certainly, Texas and Texas A&M stopped playing and haven't really renewed that. That's going to be renewed now that they're both in the SEC. But as far as playing like G5s or lower division teams, I can't think of an example where that's happened. I think Louisville and Kentucky, some of those, teams in the same state always play each other. And I don't know how much of that's dictated by lawmakers. But as far as having to play like a G5 team, I'm not sure that exists anywhere.